The Louisiana heat pressed down on the cracked concrete court like a heavy blanket, making every breath feel thick and humid. In the summer of 1987, 15-year-old Shaquille O'Neal stood awkwardly at the edge of Robert G. Cole High School's basketball court in San Antonio, Texas, where his family had just moved due to his stepfather's military assignment. At 6'6" and still growing, Shaq was all limbs and uncertainty. A gentle giant who seemed more afraid of his own strength than confident in it. "Son, you coming out for the team, or just gonna stand there watching?" The voice belonged to Coach Dale Brown, not the famous LSU coach, but a weathered high school instructor who had seen countless kids come and go through these doors. Coach Brown was in his early 50s with graying temples and hands that bore the calluses of a man who had worked construction before finding his calling in education. He wore simple polo shirts and had a way of looking at kids that made them feel like he could see something they couldn't see in themselves. Shaq shuffled his size 18 sneakers against the pavement. "I don't know, sir. I'm not really that good." His voice was surprisingly soft for someone his size, carrying the uncertainty of a teenager who had been the subject of stares and whispers his entire life. The other players on the court were running drills, their sneakers squeaking against the asphalt as they moved with the practiced precision of athletes who had been playing together for years. They occasionally glanced over at the new kid, the impossibly tall boy who looked like he'd rather disappear than join their practice. Coach Brown walked closer, his clipboard tucked under his arm. "What's your name, son?" "Shaquille. Shaquille O'Neal. But everyone just calls me Shaq." "Well, Shaq, I've been coaching basketball for 23 years, and I can tell you one thing for certain. Size like yours is a gift, but it's not the size that makes a player. It's the heart." He paused, studying the young man's face. "You got heart, son?" Shaq looked down at his feet. Back in Newark, where he'd spent most of his childhood, kids had made fun of his height, calling him a freak. When he'd tried to play basketball at his previous schools, coaches had expected him to dominate simply because of his size, never taking the time to teach him the fundamentals. When he couldn't live up to those expectations immediately, he'd been dismissed as clumsy, uncoordinated. "I don't know, sir. Everyone expects me to be good because I'm tall, but I don't want to let anyone down again." Coach Brown nodded slowly. He'd heard this story before. Not exactly, but variations of it. Tall kids who were treated like commodities instead of children. Kids who were expected to perform miracles without anyone taking the time to teach them how. "Tell you what, Shaq, how about you come to practice tomorrow after school? Not to try out, not to prove anything, just to learn. I'll work with you personally and we'll see what happens. No pressure, no expectations, just basketball." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the court as the regular team continued their scrimmage. Coach Brown's assistant, a young teacher named Ms. Rodriguez, approached with a stack of permission slips. "Dale, you sure about this one?" she asked quietly, nodding toward Shaq. He looked scared of his own shadow. Coach Brown watched as Shaq slowly walked toward the school building, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. "Sometimes, Maria, the best players aren't the ones who come in cocky and confident. Sometimes they're the ones who've been knocked down so many times they're afraid to get back up. That boy's got something special. I can feel it. But he's never really played organized ball, has he?" The other coaches saw a tall kid and expected instant results. They never saw Shaquille. Coach Brown tucked his clipboard under his arm and started walking toward the school. "That boy's been carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations his whole life. Time someone just let him be a kid who loves basketball." As the sun set over San Antonio, casting the school in golden light, Coach Brown made a mental note to call Shaq's parents that evening. Not to make promises about scholarships or championships, but to let them know their son was welcome here. To let them know that someone believed in him, not because of what he might become, but because of who he was right now. In his small apartment across town, Shaq sat at his desk, trying to focus on homework but finding his mind wandering to the conversation with Coach Brown. For the first time in years, someone had looked at him and seen more than just his height. Someone had offered to teach him, to work with him, without demanding immediate greatness in return. He pulled out a notebook and wrote at the top of a blank page, "Things to work on for Coach Brown." Below it, he listed, "Free throws, footwork, confidence." Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "Don't give up." 6 months into his training with Coach Brown, Shaq had grown another 2 inches and gained 30 pounds of muscle. But more importantly, he had found something he'd never experienced before: genuine confidence on a basketball court. The old gym at Robert G. Cole High School had become his second home, and Coach Brown had become the father figure he'd always needed in basketball. Every afternoon, while the other students rushed to catch buses or hang out at the mall, Shaq could be found in the gym with Coach Brown, working on fundamentals that other coaches had assumed he'd naturally possess. The echo of the basketball against hardwood had become a comforting rhythm, punctuated by Coach Brown's patient instructions. "Bend your knees, Shaq. Feel the ball in your hands before you shoot." Coach Brown's voice was steady and encouraging, never frustrated despite the hundreds of free throws they'd practiced together. "Remember, it's not about power, it's about consistency." Shaq nodded, bouncing the ball 3 times before taking his shot. The ball sailed through the net with a satisfying swish, and a smile spread across his face, a smile that had become more frequent over the past months. "That's 15 in a row," Coach Brown said, making a note on his ever-present clipboard. "You remember when you started? You couldn't hit 5 out of 20? "Yeah, Coach. I thought I'd never get it." Shaq retrieved the ball and positioned himself for another shot. "My old coaches used to just tell me to figure it out, or said that someone my size shouldn't need to practice free throws." Coach Brown shook his head. "Those weren't coaches, son. Those were people who saw a commodity, not a player. Real coaching is about building skills, one brick at a time." The gym door opened with its characteristic creak, and Principal Williams walked in with a man in an expensive suit, clearly a college scout. Shaq's shoulders tensed immediately. He'd been through this before. Scouts who came with big promises and bigger expectations, only to leave disappointed when he didn't immediately dominate like they'd hoped. "Coach Brown," Principal Williams called out, "I'd like you to meet Coach Thompson from Texas A&M. He's heard about our young Mr. O'Neal here." Coach Thompson stepped forward with the confident stride of someone accustomed to recruiting top talent. He was younger than Coach Brown, probably in his late 30s, with perfectly styled hair and shoes that cost more than most teachers made in a month. "Son, I've been hearing some interesting things about you," Coach Thompson said, looking Shaq up and down like he was evaluating livestock. 7 feet tall. What are you, 17 now? You must be putting up some serious numbers." Shaq glanced at Coach Brown, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Actually, sir, I'm still learning. Coach Brown has been teaching me." "Learning?" Coach Thompson interrupted with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Son, with your size, you should be dominating every game. How many points are you averaging? 25? 30? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Shaq looked down at his feet, the familiar shame creeping back in. He was averaging 12 points and 8 rebounds, solid numbers for someone still learning the game, but apparently not impressive enough for a Division I scout. Coach Brown stepped forward. "Coach Thompson, Shaq has made tremendous progress. His fundamentals are getting stronger every day, and his basketball IQ—" "Fundamentals don't win championships," Coach Thompson said dismissively. "I need players who can dominate from day one. Maybe when he develops more—" He trailed off, already heading toward the door. "Principal Williams, thank you for your time." After the scout left, the gym fell quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights. Shaq sat heavily on the bleachers, his head in his hands. "I'm never going to be good enough, am I, Coach?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I'm just too big and too clumsy to really play basketball." Coach Brown sat down beside him, setting his clipboard aside. "Shaq, look at me." When the young man lifted his head, Coach Brown's eyes were firm but kind. That man wasn't looking for a basketball player. He was looking for a ready-made product. "But you know what I see when I look at you?" Shaq shook his head. "I see a young man who's improved his free throw percentage by 60% in 6 months. I see someone who shows up every single day, even when it's hard. I see someone who cares more about getting better than about looking good. Coach Brown placed a hand on Shaq's shoulder. Most importantly, I see someone who loves this game, even when it doesn't love him back. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of disappointment slowly lifting from Shaq's shoulders. "You know what we're going to do tomorrow?" Coach Brown asked. "More free throws? More free throws. And footwork drills. And we're going to work on that jump hook you've been developing." Coach Brown stood up and grabbed a basketball. "Because I don't coach for scouts, Shaq. I coach for you. And I believe in you. Not because of what you might become, but because of who you are right now." As they prepared to leave the gym, Shaq turned to his coach. "Coach Brown, thank you for not giving up on me." "Son," Coach Brown said, turning off the lights, "I'll never give up on you. That's what real coaches do. We believe in our players, especially when they can't believe in themselves." Walking across the parking lot under the Texas stars, neither of them could have imagined that this moment, this quiet affirmation of faith between a coach and his player, would one day be remembered as the foundation of one of basketball's greatest careers. It was March 1989, and the district championship game was 2 weeks away. Cole High School's gym was packed with an energy that made the old building feel alive, the bleachers creaking under the weight of excited fans who had come to see if their team could make it to the state tournament. Shaq, now 6'10", and having filled out his frame with another year of Coach Brown's patient development, had become the cornerstone of a team that had exceeded everyone's expectations. But tonight felt different. The opposing team, Madison High, had brought their own crowd, and Shaq could hear the familiar taunts from the visiting section. "Overrated. He's just tall. Can't even hit his free throws." In the locker room before the game, Coach Brown gathered his team around him. The cinder block walls were painted in school colors, and motivational posters hung at odd angles, the kind of authentic touches that made high school basketball feel pure and untainted by the commercial pressures that would come later. "Gentlemen," Coach Brown said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect for over 2 decades, "tonight isn't about proving anything to anyone else. It's about proving something to yourselves. Shaq, that especially goes for you." Shaq nodded, but Coach Brown could see the familiar tension in his shoulders, the weight of carrying not just his team's hopes, but the accumulated doubts of everyone who had dismissed him over the years. "Coach," Shaq said quietly, "what if I let everyone down? What if all those scouts were right? The other players, Marcus Williams, the point guard who had become Shaq's closest friend, Tommy Chen, the sharpshooting forward, and the rest of the tight-knit group, looked at their teammate with understanding. They'd all seen Shaq's growth, but they'd also seen how the pressure affected him." Coach Brown knelt down in front of Shaq, speaking loud enough for the whole team to hear. "Son, do you remember that first day you came to practice? You were so scared you could barely dribble the ball." "Yeah, Coach. And do you remember what I told you about heart? That size is a gift, but heart is what makes a player." "That's right. And over these past 2 years, I've watched you develop the biggest heart of any player I've ever coached. You show up early, you stay late, you help your teammates, and you never quit. That's not about height, Shaq. That's about character." The team huddled up, and as they prepared to take the court, Coach Brown pulled Shaq aside one more time. "Whatever happens out there tonight, I want you to know something. I've coached for 25 years, and I've never been more proud of a player than I am of you. Not because of your potential, not because of where you might go, but because of who you've become." The game started as a battle. Madison High had clearly game-planned around stopping Shaq, sending double and triple teams whenever he touched the ball. Their strategy was working. After the first quarter, Shaq had only managed 4 points and was visibly frustrated. During the first timeout, the crowd could see the doubt creeping back into the young giant's face. Coach Brown called him over to the sideline. "They're scared of you, son. That's why they're sending 3 players every time you get the ball." "But Coach, I can't get good shots. Every time I try to move, there's another defender." "Then don't try to score every time. Trust your teammates. Make the right play, not the spectacular play." The second quarter was a Revelation. Instead of forcing shots through multiple defenders, Shaq began finding open teammates with crisp passes. When Marcus was open for three, Shaq found him. When Tommy had a clear lane to the basket, Shaq drew the defense and delivered a perfect pass. By halftime he had only 8 points, but he had 7 assists and his team was leading by 12. In the locker room the team was energized, but Coach Brown could see that Shaq was still bothered by his low-scoring output. "Coach, maybe I should be more aggressive in the second half. Try to score more." "Shaq, look at your teammates. Look at their faces." Shaq looked around the locker room. Marcus was grinning, talking about the best passes he'd ever received. Tommy was discussing strategy with the other players, more engaged than Coach Brown had ever seen him. The whole team was playing with a confidence and chemistry that had been building for months. "This is what leadership looks like, son. It's not always about putting up big numbers. Sometimes it's about making everyone around you better." The third quarter belonged to Shaq in a completely different way. He continued to facilitate for his teammates, but now he was also dominating defensively, blocking shots and altering others. With 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, Cole High led by 20 points, and the Madison crowd had gone quiet. That's when it happened. Marcus stole the ball at midcourt, and instead of taking the easy layup, he stopped and waited for Shaq to catch up. "This one's yours, big man," he said, delivering a perfect pass. Shaq caught the ball, elevated, and threw down a thunderous dunk that brought the home crowd to their feet. But more importantly, he looked over at Coach Brown, who was applauding not just the dunk, but everything that had led to this moment. After the game, as the team celebrated their advancement to the district championship, a different kind of scout approached Coach Brown. This one was older, more patient. In his observations, "Coach Brown, I'm Coach Mike Krzyzewski from Duke University. I've been watching your young man all season, and I have to say, what impressed me most wasn't his scoring tonight. It was his leadership, his basketball IQ, the way he made his teammates better." Coach Brown smiled, watching as Shaq signed autographs for young kids who had stayed after the game. "That's the young man I've been trying to help him become. Not just a basketball player, but a leader." "Well, you've succeeded. We'd love to have him at Duke when he's ready, but I can see he's in good hands here." As the gym emptied and the lights dimmed, Shaq helped Coach Brown collect the equipment, a routine they'd maintained for 2 years. "Coach, thank you for teaching me that basketball isn't just about scoring. Son, tonight you learned that the best players don't just play the game, they elevate everyone around them. That's a lesson that'll serve you well, whether you're playing high school ball or in the NBA someday." Neither of them spoke the words out loud, but both knew this was more than just a basketball lesson. This was a young man learning to see his own worth, not through the eyes of critics or scouts, but through the patient belief of someone who had never stopped seeing his potential. The digital clock on Shaquille O'Neal's desk read 3:47 a.m., but sleep had been elusive. At 52, the man who had become one of basketball's most dominant forces sat in his home office in Orlando, surrounded by the artifacts of an extraordinary career: championship rings, MVP trophies, and photos with presidents and celebrities. But tonight, his attention was focused on a different kind of legacy. On his computer screen was a news article he'd discovered earlier that evening. "Beloved high school coach faces financial hardship after medical bills." The accompanying photo showed a man he hadn't seen in person for over 30 years, but whose face was etched permanently in his memory. Coach Ed. Dale Brown, now 84, sitting in a modest living room that seemed far removed from the gymnasium where he'd shaped so many young lives. Shaq picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized decades ago, but had been too caught up in the whirlwind of fame to call. "Hello?" The voice was older, more fragile than he remembered, but unmistakably the same man who had patiently taught a scared teenager how to believe in himself. "Coach Brown? It's Shaquille. Shaquille O'Neal." The silence on the other end lasted so long that Shaq wondered if the connection had been lost. "Shaq? My goodness, son. Is it really you?" "Yes, sir, it's really me." Shaq's voice caught slightly. "Coach, I've been reading about your situation, with the medical bills and everything." "Oh, that. Coach Brown's voice carried the same quiet dignity it always had. "Don't worry about an old man's troubles, son. I read about all your success. Watched you on TV. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. Coach, that's exactly what I'm calling about. I never properly thanked you." What followed was a conversation that lasted until sunrise, two men separated by geography and decades, but connected by a bond that time had only strengthened. Coach Brown spoke about his wife's battle with Alzheimer's, the mounting medical costs, and his decision to sell their home to pay for her care. But mostly, he talked about his former players, including Shaq, with the same pride and love that had characterized his coaching. "You know, Shaq, I kept every newspaper clipping from your career. Every one. When you won your first championship, I cried like a baby. When you retired, I was so proud of the man you'd become. Coach, you saved my life. Do you understand that? You saw something in me when nobody else did. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Son, I just helped you find what was already there." After they hung up, Shaq immediately called his business manager, his publicist, and his closest friends. What he set in motion over the next few weeks would become one of the most heartwarming stories the internet had ever witnessed. 3 weeks later, Coach Brown received a call asking him to attend a small gathering honoring retired educators at a local community center in San Antonio. When he arrived, supported by his walking cane and accompanied by his daughter, he was surprised to see the parking lot filled with news vans and cameras. "Dad, I think this might be bigger than they told us," his daughter whispered as they approached the building. Inside, the community center had been transformed. Local dignitaries, former players from Coach Brown's decades of teaching, and what appeared to be several camera crews filled the space. But sitting in the front row, wearing a simple suit and the same gentle smile he'd had as a teenager, was Shaquille O'Neal. When Coach Brown saw him, 30 years collapsed into nothing. The 84-year-old educator's eyes filled with tears, as the man who had once been his awkward, uncertain student stood and embraced him. "Hello, Coach," Shaq said softly, his own voice thick with emotion. "I told you I'd never forget you." What happened next was captured by dozens of cameras and would be viewed millions of times across social media platforms. Shaq helped Coach Brown to a chair at the front of the room and then addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you about the man who changed my life. When I was 15 years old, scared and convinced I'd never be good enough, Coach Dale Brown saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He didn't see a future NBA player or a celebrity. He saw a kid who needed someone to believe in him." Shaq paused, looking down at his former coach, who was wiping tears from his eyes. "Coach Brown never asked for anything in return. He never tried to take credit for my success. He just loved his players and tried to help us become the best versions of ourselves. Well, Coach, today it's my turn to help you." Shaq reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Coach, you're never going to have to worry about medical bills again. You're never going to have to sell your home. This covers everything. Your wife's care, your living expenses, everything, for the rest of your lives." The check was for $1.2 million, but Shaq wasn't finished. "And because I know you're going to try to give this money away to help other people, because that's who you are, I've also established the Dale Brown Foundation for Educators. It's going to help teachers and coaches across the country who are facing financial hardship." The room erupted in applause, but Coach Brown sat quietly, overwhelmed by the gesture. When the noise died down, he stood slowly, supported by his cane, and reached for the microphone. "Shaquille," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "you don't owe me anything. Watching you become the man you are today, that's been payment enough." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of former students, colleagues, and community members. "But I want everyone here to understand something. This young man didn't become successful because he was tall. He became successful because he has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. He worked harder than anyone, he never gave up, and he always tried to lift up the people around him. That's the Shaquille I coached, and that's the man he's always been." The video of the event went viral. Immediately, "Thank you, Coach," began trending worldwide. Comments poured in from around the globe, from former students sharing stories of teachers who had changed their lives, from professional athletes talking about coaches who had believed in them, from ordinary people inspired by the reminder that kindness and gratitude can endure across decades. But perhaps the most powerful moment came at the end of the event, when the cameras were turned off and the crowd had dispersed. Shaq sat quietly with Coach Brown in the empty community center, two men whose lives had been forever intertwined by basketball, but connected by something much deeper. "Coach, I need you to know something," Shaq said. "Every championship I won, every success I had, you were part of it. Because you taught me that the most important thing isn't how big you are or how talented you are. It's how you treat people. It's whether you lift others up or tear them down." Coach Brown reached over and patted Shaq's hand. The same gesture he'd made countless times 30 years earlier. "Son, you've made an old coach very proud. Not because of the money, not because of the gesture, but because you remembered where you came from. You remembered that success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about who you help along the way." As they sat in that quiet moment, surrounded by the echoes of a lifetime spent in gymnasiums and classrooms, both men understood that this wasn't really about basketball at all. It was about the power of believing in someone, the impact of patience and kindness, and the beautiful truth that the best gifts we give are often the ones that take decades to fully unfold. The internet, for once, had gone silent not because of controversy or outrage, but because of recognition. The recognition that in a world often defined by selfishness and forgetting, some people still remember the hands that lifted them up, and some stories still have the power to remind us all of who we're capable of being.